They say the Lord watches over every living soul, but if that's true, he turned his eyes away from Harlan Hollow long before my lungs began to fail. I can feel the weight of every year now, hot and heavy on my chest, like a stone pulled from a graveyard river. The doctor says it's just age, says all things return to dust in their due season, but I know mine comes from something older, something left buried beneath those rotting porch boards of Widow Harlan's cabin. I haven't spoken of it in near 50 years, not since the last of them disappeared into those woods and the sheriff stopped asking questions. But the nights have grown longer, and the silence meaner. You ever notice how the wind sounds different when it passes over a forgotten place? It don't whistle, it don't howl, it just listens. That's how it was the night I first went up to her cabin in the hills. The quiet felt alive, like breath pressed against the back of my neck. I was 23 then, still strong in the arms and stupid in the mind, working the coal pits down near Pike Creek. My mother had warned me long before she passed never to go near the widow's land after sundown. Folks called her cursed, said her prayers were spoken to someone other than God, but hunger will make a man brave or foolish. She was paying 50 cents a day for help with the harvest, and I hadn't eaten a full meal in 3. I remember the road up, nothing but mud, roots, and the sound of my own heartbeat. The trees leaned in close, like they were whispering among themselves, telling me to go back home. But then I saw it. Her cabin, sitting alone atop that barren rise, its windows flickering with candlelight. It wasn't a warm light. No, it was pale, like moonlight trapped in glass. Smoke curled from the chimney, slow and thin, as if even fire was afraid to breathe too loud. And there, standing on the porch with her black dress trailing like spilled ink, was Widow Harlan. She wasn't as old as people said, maybe 40, maybe younger, but her eyes, Lord help me, her eyes looked like 2 pits of water with no bottom. She smiled when she saw me, though it didn't reach her cheeks. "You're late," she said, her voice soft as cloth soaked in milk. "There is much to be done before the night ends." I should have turned right then. Should have followed the path back down to town and never looked back. But I stepped forward, took off my hat, and said I was ready to work. "Before I go on, tell me, what time is it where you're sitting now? Is it dark yet where you are, or does the sun still cling to the edges of your sky like a dying prayer? If you've got the stomach to hear the rest of this, these things no priest would bless and no grave will hold, then stay with me. If you wish to hear the rest of these forgotten confessions, stay close. Subscribe and listen until the end. Inside, the cabin smelled of dried herbs, tallow, and something metallic, like old blood washed from stone. Jars lined the shelves, filled with things I couldn't name, roots twisted like fingers, cloudy liquids, pale shapes that might have once been animals or something else. A single table stood in the center of the room, its surface scarred with shallow cuts and dark stains, as if knives had long memory there. "Sit," she said, and I did, though my hands trembled in my lap. She brewed me tea, poured from a blackened kettle into a chipped porcelain cup with faded roses along the rim. I hesitated, but she only watched, unblinking. So I drank. It was bitter, sharp, like roots buried too long in wet soil. My head swam for a moment. The room swayed, and her shape seemed to blur at the edges, like heat rising off summer road tar. "You'll get used to it," she murmured. That night we worked lanterns through her fields. Only they weren't fields like ours. No corn, no wheat. Just rows of pale, thin plants with leaves like withered tongues. The soil was black and damp, even though it hadn't rained in weeks. "They grow better in the dark," she whispered when I asked. "The earth remembers what we feed it." I didn't know what she meant, not then, but a chill crept into my bones and stayed there. It was close to midnight when I heard it. A sound from beneath the floorboards of the cabin as we returned. Not quite a voice, but not just wind either. A soft, muffled scraping, like nails against wood. Widow Harlan didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did and just didn't care. She walked past me, set her lantern down, and began humming an old hymn I hadn't heard since my mother's funeral. But the way she sang it, slow, wrong, it made my teeth ache. I slept in the small shed behind the cabin that night. Straw mattress, no blanket. The moon hung thin as a sliver of bone, and the trees creaked like old men in church pews. I lay awake, thinking of that scraping sound, wondering what lay beneath those worn wooden boards. But I told myself it was rats, or wind, or my own hungry mind making ghosts from shadows. I didn't yet know that 12 men had come before me. I didn't yet know none had ever walked back down that hill, but I would, and God forgive me. I stayed. I kept her words close to my chest in the days that followed, the way a dying man might clutch a worn piece of scripture, hoping it would grant him mercy when breath finally leaves his body. Widow Harlan no longer carried herself like the grieving woman folks in town pitied just months before. There was something new in her eyes now, as if grief had hollowed out a space inside her, and something far older had crawled in to live there. She tended to her cabin the way priests tend to their altars. Quiet, exacting, whispering prayers I did not recognize as any taught by our pastor back in Lawrence Hollow. Sometimes, when the wind shifted just right across the northern pines, I could hear her singing, low, nearly a hum, words without shape, like a mother might croon to calm a child she no longer loved. I remember standing by the edge of her garden, watching her on her knees in the soil, though no flowers grew there anymore. Instead, 12 small wooden stakes had been driven into the earth, forming a crooked circle, each marked with a strip of cloth tied carefully at the top like a mourning ribbon. She spoke to them sometimes, not with madness in her tone. No, madness would have been easier to name, easier to fear. This was softer, gentler, spoken like a woman asking forgiveness from ghosts that hadn't yet appeared. When she caught me watching, she only said, "Some things must be given proper rest, or they do not rest at all," and then returned to patting the dirt as though tucking in a sleeping child. I wish I had walked away then. I wish I had let the forest swallow me whole, rather than stand beside her and ask what she meant. But curiosity has a cruel way of leading a man's feet down roads his soul is not ready to travel. She beckoned me inside her cabin before the light was fully gone from the sky, and I followed like a boy, still believing storms will spare him if he stays quiet. The air inside was thick with the scent of burning sage and tallow candles, their wax pooling along the windowsills like melted bone, and on her table, laid out with care upon a faded funeral cloth, were things I did not understand. Small glass vials of darkened liquid, a row of tarnished spoons, lengths of braided hair, and a ledger, bound in leather, too weathered to still bear a name. She opened that ledger with hands that no longer trembled, as if the act had become as natural as breath to her. Page after page was filled with careful handwriting, not scripture, not names of family or debts, but prayers I did not recognize, some in Latin, some in a language I swear was older than the soil itself. I asked her who taught her such things. She did not answer my question, only turned the ledger toward me and pointed to a page marked with dried blood. "This is the price of remembrance," she said quietly. "This is how I keep them close." The fire cracked in the hearth then, though no log had shifted, and my chest tightened like a rope had been drawn around my ribs. I did not sleep that night. I sat by her wooden table, fingers pressed against my temples, listening to her voice drift from room to room, chanting barely above a whisper. Shadows leaned along the walls, mimicking her movements, though her body remained still in the doorway. At some point, I do not recall when, she placed a cup before me filled with dark, bitter tea. "It will steady your heart," she said. I drank it because refusing would have felt like denying gravity. And though the taste was foul, I felt my pulse slow, as if the world around me had been wrapped in wool. My thoughts quieted, not from peace but from something else, something akin to surrender. Morning came pale and reluctant, as though the sun itself hesitated to spill light across that cabin. Widow Harlan sat at the table, her spine straight as a church pew, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked at me, kind but unblinking, and said, "There are 12 men buried in these hills who do not sleep. Their bodies lie still, but their souls wander, hungry, lonely, calling for home." I asked if she meant the travelers folks whispered about, the ones who passed through and were never seen again. She nodded once, slow and solemn, like a woman confessing to God in an empty chapel. "Someone must guide them to rest," she continued. "Someone who still knows prayer, even if it hurts to speak it." Her gaze fell upon me then, steady and unyielding. "And someone must stay behind to listen." I wanted to run. Every bone in my body screamed for distance, for the safety of roads and church bells and voices untouched by sorrow. But something held me there. A thread I could not see, tied around my heart by her hands, the moment I stepped across her threshold. That was the morning I first saw the altar in the cellar. It was cold beneath the floorboards, colder than any Kentucky winter I'd known. The walls were lined with shelves of old jars holding things I dared not name. Candles flickered in a ring around a stone slab stained with years of use, the wax tears hardened like frost along its edges. Above it hung a faded portrait of her husband, his eyes dark, his mouth thin, his expression unreadable. Widow Harlan placed her hand on the slab and whispered, "He never left me." None of them truly did, and though no wind stirred, the candles bent their flames toward her, as though listening. By the time I climbed back to the surface, my lungs burned from the thick air below, and the morning had broken fully across the hills. Yet the world felt wrong, too still, too silent, as though it waited for me to speak words I did not yet understand. I walked the dirt path back to the garden, where the 12 stakes stood like mourners around an unseen grave. One of the cloth strips fluttered in the breeze, and I swear I heard it sigh like breath against my ear. I did not know it then, but her ledger already had a space waiting for my name. I tried to leave that morning. I swear to you I did. I gathered my coat, my prayer book, and the little wooden cross my mother once pressed into my palm before she died, telling me it would keep the devil's teeth off my soul. The trees still dripped with dawn's cold breath, and the worms turned in the wet soil beneath my boots. Yet just as I placed my hand on the gate, I heard her voice from behind me, not loud, not sharp, just soft and certain, like she had been standing there in the dark all night waiting for me to try. "If you go," she whispered, "they will follow you. And they won't come alone." I froze, not because I believed her words entirely, but because something in them felt older than lies. I turned and saw her standing barefoot on the porch, her hair unbound, silver threads glistening in the weak sun. There was no anger in her eyes, no pleading, only a kind of pity, the sort one gives a man already walking into his grave. "You've seen what others refused to see," she said. "God won't let you unsee it, nor will they." I glanced toward the stakes in the garden, and for the smallest moment, I thought I saw the cloth strips quiver, though no wind touched them. I stayed, not out of loyalty to her, but because my legs no longer felt my own. Something had taken root in me during that night, something cold and patient. Widow Harlan led me back inside, not with force, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had already seen the outcome written in the dust of the earth. She placed a bowl of broth before me, though I don't recall the taste, only the way the steam curled upward, like a spirit trying to escape. Around us, the cabin creaked as though stretching old bones. By afternoon, she brought out the ledger again. She set it gently in front of me, open to a blank page, stained faintly reddish-brown. "Ink and faith are not enough to hold the dead still," she murmured. "Something of the living must be offered." My hands trembled. I asked her what she meant, my voice barely more than breath. She lifted her sleeve, revealing a long, pale scar across her forearm. Straight, deliberate. "Blood binds memory," she said. "Blood reminds them they were once flesh, and flesh must rest." I wanted to scream at her for the blasphemy, for turning God's mercy into this arithmetic of sorrow and bone. But before I could, the wind shifted outside, and a low moan drifted through the cracks of the wall. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't any creature I'd ever heard in those hills. It sounded like voices, many thin, strained, speaking without words, begging without tongues. Widow Harlan closed her eyes as if in prayer, but no prayer I knew would answer such a sound. The stakes in the garden rattled softly against the dirt. She told me of the first traveler, Samuel Pike, a peddler from Ohio who carried bolts of cloth and glass beads in his wagon. He came seeking shelter one storm-heavy night, and her husband welcomed him with warm food and a dry bed. In the morning the man was gone. Folks whispered he'd stolen away before dawn, but she confessed her husband found him wandering outside, eyes unfocused, whispering to the trees. By the third night, Samuel wasn't speaking anymore, just weeping, as the forest took hold of his mind. He died before sunrise, and they buried him behind the house, beneath the elder tree. She said his soul never settled. It paced the earth like a dog left out in the rain. As she spoke, she traced the rim of a tin cup with a single finger, slow and steady, her voice barely above a hush. 1 became 2, then 5, then 12, each one lonelier than the last. She lifted her gaze to mine. "And you think you can walk away from that?" I felt something inside me turn, like a key in a lock I never knew was there. Guilt seeped into me, thin at first, then heavy, like wet wool. For what, I did not yet know, only that the ground beneath that cabin remembered more than it should. That evening she led me to the stream behind the house, where the water ran dark beneath fallen branches. The air smelled of iron and moss. She handed me a rusted tin basin and told me to fill it. My reflection in the water looked pale, older somehow. When I returned, she was kneeling by the hearth, placing small bundles wrapped in cloth onto the coals. They smoldered, releasing a sickly sweet scent that made my eyes burn. I asked her what was inside. She said pieces of the forgotten, bone dust, thread from burial clothes, and prayers cut from men's last words. The fire snapped. My jaw clenched. I knew then that prayer alone could not free me from this place. Something had chosen me. Whether it was God or the dead or the widow's will, I cannot say. I only know that when night fell, I did not sleep. I sat by the window watching the stakes in the garden, standing in their crooked ring, the cloth ties fluttering like pale, beckoning hands. The chimney whispered. The trees leaned closer. And somewhere beneath the cabin floor I heard it, a faint tapping like fingertips against wood, asking to be answered. That is when I realized I had not stayed because I was trapped by her. I had stayed because something in me wanted to listen. The tapping beneath the floor did not stop. It came and went like a slow pulse, 3 soft knocks, a pause, then 2 more. I pressed my ear against the wooden boards in the dead of night, breath held, heart thudding in my throat. The sound was faint, muffled by earth and timber, but it was there, persistent, patient. Not frantic like something trapped, but deliberate, like something waiting to be invited inside. By dawn, my eyes burned from sleeplessness. Widow Harlan was already awake, sitting at the table with a candle burning, though sunlight crept through the window. She didn't look at me when she spoke. "They're asking you now," she said. "You hear them. That means they've chosen you to carry a piece of their name." I told her I wanted no part of this. My voice cracked. She only nodded, as though I had confirmed something she already knew. "Everyone says that before they understand," she whispered. She slid the ledger toward me again. That same blank page, pale and waiting, like skin yet to scar. The pen lay beside it, ink still dark, still wet from yesterday's refusal. Outside, a fog had settled along the yard, curling around the stakes like long, ghostly fingers. The cloth strips tied to them hung limp, heavy with dew, no longer fluttering but staring, silent, soaked witnesses to every buried truth beneath this soil. I couldn't help but stare at the pale dirt between them, wondering how many lay there, how many whispered at night, how many knew my name now. Widow Harlan turned the page. There, in rough, crooked script, was the name of her husband, Elias Harlan, followed by a single line drawn through it so hard the paper had nearly torn. Beneath that name were others. Some I recognized from old gravestones in the churchyard. Some I'd never seen before. And some had no names at all. Only numbers, date, location of burial, condition of body, cause of death. At the bottom of the newest entry was a space, empty, waiting. "The dead do not rest, because the living refuse to carry what they left behind," she said quietly. "Their pain, their last breath, their sins, someone must hold it, write it, remember it, or it rots in the dirt and grows teeth." She placed the pen in front of me. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. When I did not move, she reached into her apron and pulled something out. A button, small, blackened with age, strings still attached. "Samuel Pike," she said softly. "What they found near his grave when he first began to call." She set it beside the pen. "Touch it, and you'll feel it." What he saw before the forest swallowed him. I didn't want to. God knows I didn't want to. But my fingers moved anyway. The moment I touched the button, the cabin was gone. I saw trees, tall and rotting, bending overhead like ribs of a great beast. I smelled wet soil, copper, decay. And in the center of a clearing stood a figure, thin, clothes tattered, eyes hollow, but staring right at me. Samuel Pike. His mouth moved, but no sound came out, only a dry rasp like leaves scraping stone. Then he lifted his hand and pointed behind me. When I turned, I saw them, dozens, maybe more, standing between the trees. Bodies broken, faces pale as candle wax, eyes sunken but open wide, watching. Some missing limbs, some with rope burns around their necks, some with hands pressed over their mouths like they were still trying to stop the dirt from filling them. All silent, all waiting, the vision snapped. I was back at the table. My chair fell backward as I stumbled. My chest heaved. Widow Harlan didn't comfort me, didn't move, just watched. Now you understand why this ledger must not remain empty. I wanted to run, but the world outside no longer felt like it belonged to me. The trees leaned closer to the cabin. The fog thickened, settling like breath on cold glass. Even the sky looked wrong, too pale, too still. And from somewhere deep beneath the floorboards, that tapping began again. 3 knocks, a pause. 2 more, waiting. My hand hovered above the page. The pen's wooden grip felt warm, as if someone else's hand had just been there guiding it. My lips moved in silent prayer, though I didn't know which God I was praying to anymore. I wrote one word, not my name. Not yet, a date, then another, a place, then the word unclaimed. The tapping stopped. For the first time since I arrived, the silence felt heavier than the sound. Widow Harlan finally exhaled, almost like relief. "They know you're listening now," she said. "Tonight they will come closer, and you must not answer when they speak your name." I asked her what happens if I do. She looked at the window. where the fog pressed against the glass like a face. "You won't be writing about them anymore," she said. "You'll be writing to them. It is quiet now, not the kind of quiet that brings rest, but the sort that presses against your ribs, makes every breath feel like a sin." Widow Harlan sleeps in her chair by the dying hearth, head slumped forward, hands still curled around that worn Bible with pages missing. The candle beside her has melted into a puddle of pale wax, like the spine of some small creature collapsed under its own weight. I know dawn is near, though the windows admit no light, only the milky blur of fog, thick as tallow, sealing the world outside into a muted grave. The ledger lies open on the table. My handwriting stains its pages now. 6 names have been added since last night. I don't remember writing them, not fully. I recall the sound of the wind outside shifting into something like a voice. I recall the creak of the floorboards, though neither of us moved. I recall my hand moving while the rest of me sat rigid, the pen scratching, as though bone itself guided it instead of flesh. Each name brought a taste of dirt to my tongue, and a coldness bloomed in my chest like a flower carved from ice. Their voices are not whispers anymore. They speak plainly now, like neighbors at the door. Sometimes they sound young, sometimes old. Sometimes I hear them calling from the woods, sometimes from beneath the earth. And once, God help me, I heard one within the wall beside my bed, breathing shallowly, as though the boards themselves had lungs. They ask if I remember them. They ask if it hurt. They ask if I too will lie beneath the Harlan soil when my ink has dried and my breath has thinned to nothing. I no longer answer, but I think they already know. Widow Harlan woke just once, some hours before now. Her voice was so weak I thought it belonged to someone else. "I was the first to hear them," she said. "When Elias died and I laid him in that cold ground with my own hands, I thought my grief was a holy thing. But grief, when left out in the dark, starts to feed on what's living." She closed her eyes again. I don't know if she still breathes. Outside, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, like someone walking barefoot on wet leaves. Then another set, then more. They stopped at the edge of the porch. The boards did not creak. No knock came to the door. They only waited. I could feel their weight through the walls, like the house itself bowed under their presence. I almost rose to see them, almost drew back the curtain, but my legs would not obey. Or perhaps I feared that if I looked, I would see not strangers, but faces I once knew. The ledger waits for one final entry. I know what it wants. I know what she meant when she said that one day I wouldn't be writing about them, I'd be writing to them. The pen lies across the page, ink pooled at its tip like stagnant blood. My hands no longer tremble. My pulse has slowed to a timid flutter beneath my skin. I think that is what surrender feels like. The moment when terror softens, not into comfort, but into acceptance. I can smell the soil now. Not the earth outside, but the damp, cold scent of grave dirt. It seeps between the cracks in the floorboards. The tapping has stopped altogether. They no longer need to ask permission to enter. They are here, inside the walls, beneath the table, behind my chair. I feel them lean close when I lower my head to write. I feel their breath, cold as January water, stirring the hair at my temple. My name. They speak it as though it already belongs to them. I think of my mother's voice calling it across the field when I was a boy. I think of my father carving it into the beam above our hearth when I was born. And now I think of how it will look on this page, followed by a number, a date, a stretch of Kentucky soil. I dip the pen. I press it to the paper. The ink spreads. There is no more room for prayer. The cabin walls exhale as though relieved. The fog presses closer, and I begin to write.